we have a simple message for all countries: test, test, test. Test every suspected case. Every day, more tests are being produced to meet the global demand.
Well, speaking of things that weren't done, testing. This has become one of the central problems facing the United States right now. President Trump said, I think 3 weeks ago, that there would be some sort of rapid testing. He mentioned Google. He said that was imminent. It hasn't happened. Why is this so hard? And what do you think it's going to take to get a rapid turnaround test in place?
Yeah, we need a variety of tests. The testing that's currently being done, which
is a PCR-based test, there was an advance that our foundation drove that now you can do a self-swab, so you could very quickly do the test without having the healthcare worker have to wear protective equipment and having to change that. So eventually we'll have a home test that you can just swab and send back in for the PCR.
So what is the most immediate thing that needs to be done with regard to testing?
Well, you can imagine having a website where you enter in the criteria of your symptoms, are you an essential worker, where you are, and it gives you back a priority level. And so all the testing operations make sure that they're only taking in enough high-priority stuff that they can maintain a very quick turnaround so you don't have stale results. You know, that should be reasonable to put together. In parallel, we've got to go as fast as we can on therapeutics and go as fast as we can on a vaccine, because therapeutics can save a lot of lives and avoid the overload. And with luck, some of those will be promising in the next 3 to 6 months.
the vaccine is critical, because until you have that, things aren't really going to be normal. They can open up to some degree, but the risk of a rebound will be there until we have very broad vaccination.
Since the beginning of the coronavirus outbreak, it's been really important to do testing, because that's the important piece of the puzzle to allow us to get patients the care they need, but also to protect our families and communities.
We have some really good stuff. First of all, the numbers have been incredible on testing, but in the days ahead, we're going to go even faster, and we have something from Abbott Labs, which is right here, and that's a 5-minute test, highly accurate.
Had a substantial addition to testing with the authorization of point-of-care tests, especially the Abbott point-of-care test, which the President has pulled out of the box. You can get an answer within minutes of having this test done. With those tests being approved for Abbott and for others, these are available around the country. They're planning to scale up the number of tests that can be put out throughout the country over the next month, and patients can get the answer within as little as 15 to 5 minutes. And then, of course, an appropriate plan of treatment can be given.
We're also massively increasing testing. And I want to say a special word about testing, because it is so important. And as I've said for weeks and weeks, this is the way through. This is how we will unlock the coronavirus puzzle. This is how we will defeat it in the end. And what we need to do is massively ramp up not just tests so that you can know whether you've had the disease in the past, the so-called antibody test, because that will enable you to go to work in the confidence that you can't be infected or infectious.
Inside Nassau University Medical Center in East Meadow, finger prick tests for COVID-19 and its antibodies will soon be administered to the county's first responders, including police, medic, sheriff, correction officers. Results available in 15 minutes, says Nassau's health commissioner.
When the state and FDA approval comes down and these tests can be legally administered, the protocols will go into place.
more NHS staff are returning to the front line, and more testing is taking place to help those self-isolating come back and to protect those working so hard in our hospitals and in social care.
Now, a COVID-19 vaccine research group is recruiting 500 more volunteers for phase 2 clinical trials. Volunteers will have a 50% chance of getting a medium dose injection, a 25% of getting a low dose injection, and a 25% chance of getting a placebo. High doses are excluded as the phase 1 test results show it is more likely to cause a temporary fever on patients. The health of volunteers will be carefully monitored, and after receiving the test, they're required to complete a 14-day self-observation and return for 3 checkups. 14 days, 28 days, and 6 months after the injection.
The research starts at a cellular level.
We've been able to manipulate viruses so that they can introduce new genes that give cells the ability to do things they don't normally do,
such as making the genetically modified brain cells more sensitive to magnetic fields and light. Once manipulated, viruses and nanomagnets are injected into the bloodstream. Then a headset like this with lasers, light detectors, and electromagnets can measure and stimulate brain activity and ultimately communicate with a machine with no brain surgery involved.
Then you wear the hat, you sit in your chair, and you control your UAV.
Apart from military uses, Robinson says non-invasive brain-computer interface can help people regain their hearing or sight.
If you've lost an eye or your retina, the part of the brain that processes that information, it still functions. And if I could figure out the right pattern of activity to play in the brain, it would be as though you still had your eyes, because the information reaching that part of your brain where you perceive the image is still perfectly intact.
So far, Robinson's team has been able to control fruit fly behavior with magnets. Here, it's expanding its wings. DARPA would like this type of research to advance to humans in 4 years. Robinson says this research draws concerns with privacy and autonomy. He says ethical guidelines are in the works to maximize the benefits and minimize the risks of this technology. Elizabeth Lee, VOA News, Houston.
Tonight, mounting questions about the program the president promised the American people.
It's going to be very quickly done, unlike websites of the past, to determine whether a test is warranted and to facilitate testing at a nearby convenient location.
Touting Google's work on a website with easy access to coronavirus testing information.
Google has 1,700 engineers working on this right now. They've made tremendous progress.
And it wasn't just the president. Dr. Deborah Birx of his coronavirus task force holding up this chart to explain how it would work.
Where clients and patients and people of interest can go, fill out a screening questionnaire.
The vice president jumping in too.
And then at the same website, you'll be directed to one of these incredible companies that are going to give a little bit of their parking lot so that people can come by and do a drive-by test.
But about a half hour after the president's event concluded, Google tweeting this statement on behalf of their sister company, Verily. Their website, as of right now, is in the early stages of development, and that it plans to roll testing out in the Bay Area with the hope of expanding more broadly over time. Today, the vice president was pressed for an explanation.
So where's the discrepancy about the website, Google's involvement?
We're working literally around the clock. And I know that our whole team working on this public and private partnership couldn't be more grateful to all of the hardworking people at Google that are helping to put this website together. But tomorrow, 5 o'clock, we'll have very specific. Description tomorrow about.
Chairman. Thank you for having this hearing. 5G, as you well know, also uses higher frequency waves that don't travel as far and will rely on a network of hundreds of thousands, potentially millions of small cell sites. And the question then is, are there any health implications, any public safety implications to those additional sites that are likely to be located close to homes, schools, workplaces, and closer to the ground? Correct?
Correct, Senator. Yes.
If you go to the FDA website, pretty unsatisfactory. There basically is a cursory and superficial citation to existing scientific data saying, quote, the FDA has urged the cell phone industry to take a number of steps, including support additional research on possible biological effects of radio frequency fields for the type of signal emitted by cell phones. I believe that Americans deserve to know what the health effects are, not to prejudge what scientific studies may show, and they deserve also a commitment to do the research on outstanding questions. So my question for you, particularly Mr. Gillen and Mr. Perry, how much money has the industry committed to supporting additional independent research? I stress independent research. Is that independent research ongoing? Has any been completed? Where can consumers look for it? And we're talking about research on the biological effects of this new technology.
Thank you, Senator. I think, thank you for your focus on the issue. Safety is paramount, and as you alluded to, we rely on the expert agencies, we rely on the findings of the FDA and others as to the requirements to keep all of us safe. There are no industry-backed studies, to my knowledge right now. Happy to visit with you as to what opportunities you think there needs to be more studies, and we're always for more science. We also rely on what the scientists tell us.
So essentially, the answer to my question, how much money? Zero.
I can certainly follow up with you, Senator. To my knowledge, there's no active studies being backed by industry today.
Anybody else know of industry commitments to back research, fund it, support it, to ascertain scientifically the health effect?
Senator, I'm not aware either, but I do know that with small cells especially, you're going to have lower power levels. And of course, as from a carrier perspective, you want to be able to manage interference so that that interference is the lowest interference possible. So I would think that some of those studies or some of that information could be utilized in looking at health consequences. But no, I'm not aware of any.
So there really is no research ongoing. We're kind of flying blind here, so far as health and safety is concerned. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
This will be very important information for a lot of you. Illustrative of what's really going on with Google, which has more tentacles than 10 octopi. And Google is also involved in some very, very heavy-duty advanced research, a lot of which we don't even know about. In terms of mapping, learning to control, manipulate, and otherwise influence your DNA, it's all about control. Total, absolute, cradle-to-grave control. And here tonight to talk about this is Leuren Moret, who broke the story on this program of Google's nefarious deeds, which very few people outside of you folks listening have a clue about. Welcome back, Leuren.
Oh, good evening, Jeff. Thank you so much. This is really exciting to be able to continue updating the Google story.
Oh, it's huge.
It's huge.
They are doing things. I mean, look at that cute little logo, all right? About as harmless looking and non-threatening as it could be. People just don't understand the power, which is growing enormously all the time. Google has the total sanction and backing of the international elite who are running the show, and they are making really no bones about where they're going, and where they're going is total control. Look what they've done with their satellite, their ground cams going by down your street. Unless you really raise hell, your picture is on the internet, your home, your residence, your privacy. What privacy? It's all part of the TSA PSYOP. There are many facets to it of taking your dignity away, breaking you down, and making you completely malleable and easily manipulated and formed into any kind of mass they want. Leuren, go ahead.
Well, let's talk about the Internet, the history of the Internet, because that really exposes who is behind these programs and who the architects are. I was at Leuren Moret lab as a research scientist from 1989 to 91. And what I learned is that the backbone of the Internet was developed at Leuren Moret. The reason they developed it was out of concern for contractors working for the Department of Defense who had to be physically located close to each other so that they could communicate and collaborate on DoD projects. And the DoD developed the Internet as a sort of an email system so that contractors could decentralize and be scattered around the United States so that if there was an attack, they would not all be taken out by a few bombs in one central location.
Sure.
So, from the beginning to the middle to the present, the Internet is Department of Defense. It's Pentagon. It was set up by the Pentagon. It's controlled by the Pentagon. And it's being used by the Pentagon to control the masses. That is the purpose. There's no other way to describe it.
Agreed.
So, then, once they got the Internet set up, they gave it to us to use like a new Maserati, and everybody had lots of fun for 20 years on the Internet.
Well, totally addicting, of course.
It's completely addicting, but what they're doing is distracting, again, the people, the public, the population from social connections, community connections. They are taking people away from daily direct communication with the their web of life, the people around them.
Right, and it used to be, you make a beautiful point here, not so beautiful, but right on the money, face-to-face contact with people, looking them in the eye, three-dimensional sensory input from people, some would suggest 4, is crucial to an advancing society. This society has been literally sidetracked into a cul-de-sac, and it's now chasing its tail in a virtual world of nothingness. It's amazing.
It's true. It's nothing. It's what they do. What I've finally realized is that each time they give us something new and modern and wonderful that will improve our lives, what they're doing is actually taking away something that was vital to our humanity, to our spirituality, to our connectedness, and giving us something that is a piece of junk. And I've come to the conclusion, although I've used the Internet in just to have a tremendous advantage in being able to do research that it wouldn't be possible to do in a library.
That's the bait. It's a drug you cannot deny.
Yep.
I mean, it's totally
It's
addictive.
heroin through
the
DSL line.
Yep, there you go. That's it.
So what they've done is to set up the Internet, get us addicted to it, and then they started developing the programs, the applications. So the first one was Microsoft and Bill Gates. And Microsoft was set up so that there would be one global operating system that the U.S. government had a backdoor into for all computers everywhere in the world.
Right.
Then they set up Google as a search engine, and let's just look at the background of the two guys who supposedly set it up.
Larry Page and Sergey Brin.
That's right. Now, Sergey Brin he was born in Russia, so he's from an immigrant family. But listen to this. His father was a mathematician who worked at the University of Maryland, and his mother worked for NASA.
I didn't know that one. Well, it's like a blue-blood line.
NASA. And
Yeah.
that is exactly where Sergey Brin and Larry Page park their private jets.
Of course.
Is at the NASA facility.
Mm-hmm. They don't have to go through TSA. Gosh, what a surprise.
Right. Larry Page is, he's an American. His parents were both computer science professors at Michigan State University, and his father was one of the top experts in the United States on artificial intelligence. Now, Sergey Brin married a Polish-American woman called Anne Wojcicki, and she had started, actually, Sergey and Larry Page started Google in the garage of her sister. And Anne had started a company, a startup company before she married Sergey Brin called 23andMe.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we have 23 chromosomes on our DNA, and that company was set up so that Anne could voluntarily connect DNA from people through the Internet who would pay her $1,000 to assess their DNA and then advise them on good marital matches for them through DNA matching.
Yeah.
Now, what's interesting is Larry Page married Lucinda Southworth, who has a PhD in biological information systems. That's pretty interesting, and those sure do sound like CIA marriages.
Yep.
So, as soon as Anne Wojcicki married Sergey Brin, she was given millions of dollars in venture capital from Google the day of the wedding.
I think she got $20 million just to start.
Right. And I live in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I drive over the San Francisco Bay Bridge or around the East Bay fairly frequently, and I can't tell you in the last year how many times I have seen that blimp from down there in the South Bay where they park their airplanes. There's a huge blimp, and on the side of it is painted 23andMe. And it spends all day and all weekend flying over San Francisco Bay Area advertising her company. Now, you know, you might say or ask Jeff or someone else might ask, well, so if somebody wants to give their DNA and find out whether a potential partner is suited or not, you might say, well, that's just their business. But that's not true, because if you get one person's DNA in the family, you have everyone's.
That's right. All right, hold on. Leuren Moret is our guest tonight, a longtime friend of good people everywhere on the planet. Her work on depleted uranium, of course, really knows no bounds and needs not much of an introduction. She's talked about it too many times to count around the world and on this program as well. We're talking about Google and DNA and control. And we'll be back. Okay, back with Leuren Moret. Next time you hit the Google search function, just keep in mind that your finger is doing a lot more than simply looking up information. You're helping to propel a monster on the planet. It is a beast. It's unbelievable what's going on. Go ahead.
It's unbelievable, and what I want to emphasize is that Google, Microsoft, Facebook, and the social networking websites,
all of them.
eBay, Skype, Google Mail, Yahoo Mail, PayPal, these are all the same entity. They're all integrated. They get bought and sold and traded around, and they usually have a youthful face like Mark Zuckerberg or
Sure.
Sergey Brin or Bill Gates or Larry Page on the face of them, but these are all U.S. Navy and military operations, and Sergey Brin's ties through his mother to NASA really do expose that. Now, I know a physicist in Berkeley who told me that in the 1970s, in the laboratory that he was working in, they were tracking people in the lab by the electromagnetic frequency emitted by individuals' DNA. In other words, every living thing is an antenna that transmits and receives. We're an electrical system, and the DNA in every living thing has a unique frequency and signal. Believe it or not, that is what they're using, what they're focusing on, and what they're weaponizing to completely control us. The DNA Human Genome Project was carried out at the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, where I was a staff scientist for 5 years. But the Lawrence Livermore Lab, Los Alamos National Lab, these are all nuclear weapons labs, were also involved. That means the military, because the nuclear weapons labs exist for the Pentagon, and the Pentagon exists for the oil companies. So the Human Genome Project was set up and well-funded to experiment and to research and to describe, to quantify and qualify the human genome. Now, how would they use that? Well, what we know about Google is that they are doing DNA surveys from space. This would be NASA and the Navy. NASA is run by the Navy. They have been tracking and identifying isolated populations, for instance, in the Amazon, who have never had contact with Western people. These are villages of isolated people who are still living their traditional hunter-gatherer lives,
Right.
and they've never seen a Westerner. That's not just humans. They are also doing a global species survey, and I've been tracking this for 2 years and noticed that many new species are being discovered, and it seems to be on a grid system. So they're doing a survey from space, and they went down the west coast of South America and then came up the east coast, and now they're in Southeast Asia. And if you watch in the news, about once a week they come up with a new article and photos on new species they've discovered. This is part of the United Nations Agenda 21 program, which is to identify all species and to do a complete global inventory of humans and animals. And what David Rockefeller has said about Agenda 21 is that in the end, we're going to have a chip on every person, and they will only be allowed to take out of the system what they put into it. In other words, if you work 12 hours a day, you're allowed to take 12 hours of something of value out of the system, but nothing more. That is total slavery. That is reducing humanity to being robots. That is eliminating spirituality. It's eliminating free choice. It's eliminating everything that makes us human beings. Do you agree?
Sounds right to me.
And so, so what what is going on? The J. Craig Venter Institute, which you sent me the article,
Right.
has their mission as, quote, to forge new life forms, unquote. And they are also involved in manipulated computer code on DNA. What does this mean? Well, Dr. Helen Wallace from GeneWatch in 2002 said, we are in great danger, and she described this as a massive DNA database by the back door. Do you have any comments, Jeff?
We have to take a break here, and we'll be back. This is a subject that is very difficult for the average person to accept. The article is up at Rense.com. I've forgotten the title of the article, Leuren. What is it?
Oh, just a second. It's called White House Gives Go-Ahead for Elitists to Control DNA.
That's right. Okay, I'm going to pull that.
December 20th.
Yeah, I'll pull the article back up.
Yes.
All right, stand by. We'll be back in just a minute. Okay, back with Leuren Moret. What interests me about this whole thing, Leuren, is and you do this all the time, and many of you listening do it as well. You look into the background of the people, the principals, and find out what their roots are. And if you look into Venter's background, I mean, the guy is pretty well known. I mean, if you follow this whole issue of genetic mapping, Craig Venter is right there. He was actually charging people over $700,000 in the early 2000s, somewhere around there, to map their DNA and give them a map. $700,000.
That's right.
Now, what this does sociologically, of course, is it begins to set up a caste system here, which we already have, but this is a different way of doing it. And I don't know where it's all going to go, but it's clearly hurtling forward at a pace that is pretty damn scary if you understand the potential of control here, which is complete.
I think I can explain where this is going to go. The J. Craig Venter Institute is a CIA and military operation.
Well, no surprise there, of course.
And anyone in science with money and status is supported by these vested interests, or they wouldn't get that money. They're giving the answers that the money interests want. And so what he's developing, or that institute is developing under his guidance, is the very software of life. And what they're doing is using computing, medicine, technology, and the police state to converge into basically what is creating a totalitarian scientific oligarchy. And their purpose is to get this information and use it in discriminatory programs where the rich benefit and the poor are impacted negatively by these programs. And the second part of that agenda is the depopulation initiative. Now, a really good example about this biopiracy is the Indonesian health minister. Her name is Siti Badila Supari. And in 2007, she wrote a paper with 4 other researchers who worked for her, explaining why they had made the decision to halt the sharing of viral isolates of the avian flu in the Indonesian population. They no longer would share it with the World Health Organization.
I remember that very well.
2007, and they had been cooperating fully and giving samples to the WHO, the Centers for Disease Control,
and then they
Hong
offered,
Kong.
and then they stopped making their sequences available, and then they offered to sell them. I mean, it was a pretty weird turnaround there. But go ahead, please.
Well, there was a huge public outcry, and there were a lot of negative reactions to her from the vested interests and their their operatives. But she said, we have halted this sharing of the viral material because of exploitation of biological resources of third world countries, poorer countries. And so there they perceived it was a discriminatory program and it would be used against them, and they were correct.
Right.
And whether it was for depopulation or whatever it was, they knew money was behind it, and she was absolutely right.
Doesn't the U.S. Navy have I guess it's will be a bioweapons lab in Indonesia?
Oh, they probably have them all over the world, but
I mean, there's one that's well known there, I'm pretty sure.
The U.S. is pretty involved in Indonesia. That's why Obama went there on this last trip, this recent trip. But they're also talking about the Venture Institute. They're talking about a synthetic genome, or the ability to replicate entire organisms' hereditary history. So these are not simple programs. These are very sophisticated and very complex programs. Now, I did an interview on February 3rd, 2008, with Dr. Wynne Parker, who has a program called Parker's Pathways. You could probably Google it and find it on the internet. It was 2 hours, and what I talked about was nanoparticle toxicity. And this includes fluoride, chloramine, chemtrails, depleted uranium, and then also nanoparticle mobility, how very, very mobile nanoparticles are, and a very new discovery that I had found just weeks before that interview. I saw all these press releases coming out, a flurry of them from the UC Berkeley campus, from the Lawrence Berkeley Lab, from the National Science Foundation, from the National Academy of Sciences, and I said, this has to be a huge discovery. And what it was, Jeff, was a laboratory on the UC Berkeley campus had demonstrated with a nanoparticle, they transmitted a well-known song to that nanoparticle, and they had a receiver to capture and replay that song that was transmitted from that nanoparticle.
I remember hearing it. They had it up on YouTube, didn't they?
Right. And it's still, I think, on the laboratory website at UC Berkeley. But I went, oh my God, what in the world is the application of that?
Right.
This is huge, because all those the whole scientific establishment in the U.S. would not be so excited. And so on the air, I was talking about depleted uranium and the tremendous affinity it has for the DNA and mitochondria, because uranium and phosphate structures just have they have a love affair all through the universe. And that means that when people are exposed to uranium particles from these wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and Yugoslavia, and by the way, it's over here in 2 weeks in the U.S., and we're inhaling it.
Sure, all the time.
It sticks to our DNA and our mitochondria that provide all the energy for the body. So I think we're taking a break.
We are. You have good ears. They have also monitoring stations set up all around the world to track the spread of depleted uranium. They being, you know who they are. They know what's going on exactly.
They know where every atom is.
When this was first discovered by the U.S. military in 1943, well, American scientists discovered it, the decision was made not to use it for obvious reasons. Somebody made the decision to go ahead and use it against the people in Yugoslavia and then Iraq, knowing full well what would happen. And that's a party I would like to see brought to justice, whoever that was. Back in just a minute. Okay, back with Leuren Moret, talking about very big things that are going on right now as we speak at a very rapid rate. All right, Leuren, go ahead. We have one segment left already. It's fascinating.
I know. So as I was sitting there describing all of this to Dr. Parker, and I was talking about HARP. This is all integrated into the HARP system. I knew that Dr. Parker, when Parker was not his real name, I knew he was a CIA scientist. I knew he'd worked for the U.S. government, for the Department of Defense, for the World Health Organization, and the UN at different times. And I knew that he was a microbiologist who had, read proposals, grant proposals, research papers. He knew the whole field because he had to advise the government. And so I just sort of said, Dr. Parker, what is the application of this discovery that nanoparticles are transmitters? And he caught his breath and he said, well, it's to redesign the human genome.
That's all, huh?
That's all.
They're going to create a new species, is what they're talking about here.
It's to create anything they want to.
Right.
It's to repeat anything they want to. It's this totalitarian, insane scientific oligarchy that's run by psychopaths, and they think they can do anything they want to.
Well, so far nobody's around to stop them, unfortunately.
Now, what is transmitting and receiving that's around us? Well, how about cell phones in the megahertz frequency band? These are some abstracts that I'm going to just read the titles of. This is 1996. Single and double-strand DNA breaks in rat brain cells after acute exposure to radio frequency electromagnetic radiation. And they used the cell phone frequencies. Here's another one, 1997. Melatonin and a spin trap compound block radio frequency electromagnetic radiation-induced DNA strand breaks in rat brain cells. Here's another one, 1995. Oh, I've already talked about that. Here's another one, 1998. Structural and functional changes in proteins induced by free radical mediated oxidative stress. This is about free radicals. And protection, you can use chemicals to protect the cells. Okay, so then what I noticed in these citations and abstracts is that in the years after 2000, the focus changed. So here's one from 2004. Extremely low frequency electromagnetic fields as effectors of cellular responses in vitro. Possible immune cell activation. So they can boost immunity, but they can also lower it. This is another one, 1995. Microwaves from GSM mobile telephones affect a certain chromosome, and human lymphocytes, those are blood cells, from hypersensitive and healthy persons. So this one, let's see, there's another one. I'm on the wrong.
It's just literally amazing what can and is being done on the back of what seems like a very innocuous and convenient telecommunications system platform, cell phones, microwaves. They're able to do all kinds of things, and they are doing them. And they are also using the electric grid to do things. I've told the story about the Lily Wave many times. Go ahead.
Yes, this is another one. This is published in 2010. Effect of radio frequency electromagnetic radiations on passive avoidance behavior and brain morphology in Wistar rats. Passive avoidance behavior is when you and I are speaking about these horrific things. Other people are trying to warn citizens of the world, and they're just not interested. No. That is passive avoidance behavior. And you can cause it with cell phones. Now, this is another one. Pathophysiology of cell phone radiation. Oxidative stress, that's from free radicals, and carcinogenesis with focus on male reproductive system. So they're talking about sterility, about cancer, and about altering people's behavior. And the airport scanners are doing the same thing.
Wouldn't surprise me. No, I'm amazed that people, there's very little attention being paid to the electric grid. And as all of you listening know, it is surrounding you and everybody you know 24 hours a day. Your home, your office, it doesn't matter. It's called wiring in your walls. And that 60 hertz electric service that you rely on to power your goodies can also be used to carry any kind of telecommunication business you can imagine, and I would submit mind and behavior altering and control platforms as well. It's all doable. Well, if they don't want to use the electric grid and hard wires, they can go to the microwave systems interlocked throughout the cellular broadcast systems in this country. They can tap in anywhere, anytime they want to. It's very simple to do.
It's very simple to do because we are electrical systems and we transmit and receive just like any other antenna.
We're electrical first and chemical second, and unfortunately most people don't understand that. We are electric beings.
That's right. And a lot of this was described in the 1930s in the lectures that Bertrand Russell gave at Oxford University. They were printed or published in a book in 1952 called The Impact of Science on Society. And I would like to read a paragraph, if that's okay.
Yeah, we have 3 minutes, so you have to hurry.
Okay. A totalitarian government with a scientific bent might do things that to us would seem horrifying. The Nazis were more scientific than the present rulers of Russia and were more inclined to the atrocities that I have in mind. If they had survived, they would probably have soon taken to scientific breeding. Any nation which adopts this practice will, within a generation, secure great military advantages. The system, one may surmise, will be something like this, except possibly in the governing aristocracy. All but 5% of males and 30% of females will be sterilized. The 30% of females will be expected to spend the years from 18 to 40 in reproduction in order to secure adequate cannon fodder. As a rule, artificial insemination will be preferred to the natural method. The unsterilized, if they desire the pleasures of love, will usually have to seek them with sterilized partners. In other words, Jeff, Bertrand Russell's message is that wild reproduction is no longer an option.
Yeah, loud and clear. Interesting, isn't it, also how the initials AI stand for artificial insemination and artificial intelligence. Probably lots of other A's too, but those two come to mind.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
So basically, they have unlimited budgets. They have an unlimited scientific body in universities to do all this research. And today, over 50% of scientific research money in universities comes from the Pentagon.
It's amazing. You look at a university and you think, nice, benign, passive institution for higher education and enlightenment, when in point of fact, they are the men and women who create the weapons of mass destruction, mass social engineering, engineering of information, engineering of societal change and development. It's all being done there. Now, the military doesn't do it very much at all. They contract it out to these people, and it's all money. Everybody's got a price, apparently.
And they are the prostitutes of the wealthy just as much as the military and organized crime are. The ruling elite stand on those three legs.
Couldn't agree more. Talk to them, and they'll say, we're just doing our job here. They don't want to think. Go ahead.
They have no conscience about it.
No. Most of them don't. They don't care. They don't want to know. They don't look beyond their little laboratories and what they're doing with their grant money. And they don't want to know down the road that they may be literally participating in the deaths of millions of people. And that's a fact.
It is a fact. And, you know, the uranium levels, I plotted them on a graph for Los Angeles, 1999 to 2009. And the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power has been measuring uranium in the drinking water there since 1999. And you can actually see the big battles in the water, the uranium levels in Los Angeles drinking water. And what's happening in Los Angeles schools is that the boys are disappearing from the classroom.
Yeah, yeah.
It's the decade. It's the century of disappearing males now.
Well, they're being feminized by the culture on top of everything else. So
That's
what
right.
what chance does the average male really have long term? The dominance of the female, the estrogens and phytoestrogens, and how many different foods? Oh, it's unbelievable.
Everything.
Yeah, it's all over. Leuren, thank you again for enlightening us so much. I appreciate you very much, and I look
Thank
forward
you,
to our
Jeff.
next conversation. Merry Christmas to you, my friend.
Thank you, and we all appreciate you so much and wish you a Merry Christmas, too.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Good.
Leuren Moret. And there you have it. All right.